Hi, you're listening to the ASC Podcast. ASC is a private therapy clinic specialising in working with young people and their families. The Ask It Podcast encourages talking about talking, facilitates your own inner wisdom, and rather than providing answers, considers good questions. Today's Ask It question is, how do we manage difference? The work of adolescence is to, in stages, move away from the family unit and step into the outside world. One of the ways we do this is through peer groups. But what if you don't quite fit into one of those peer groups? What if you don't like the same kind of music, don't wear the same kind of clothes, don't watch the same TV programs? You're maybe not quite as bright as the other people in the group. What happens then? You can end up feeling on the outside, feeling isolated. That can be a really lonely place to be. Sometimes we begin to withdraw even further and start to blame ourselves, feeling that there must be something innately wrong with us, that we're some kind of strange alien that's different from everyone else. Sometimes this generates feelings of shame, and the isolation can be so profound that we end up turning our anger in on ourselves. Sometimes that results in substance and alcohol abuse, sometimes in forms of self-harm and self-hatred. Often the net result of this is that we begin to feel really anxious in social settings. It seems to me that difference is at the root of many a conflict. When we perceive others to be different, it's somehow threatening in some way, and it can be really unsettling, making us want to cast the other out of the group, to annihilate, to destroy and obliterate the difference. A few years ago, I kept hens. I had 3 hybrid hens that were varying shades of brown, and one pure white, purebred hen that was called Tilly. Now, the 3 brown hens took an instant dislike to Tilly, and they'd peck at her and scratch at her, and the poor thing was blooded and battered, and she had to be separated from the others. Well, over time, they learned to tolerate her and stopped attacking her. But after that, she never fully trusted them, and she'd keep herself separate. And this reminded me about an incident that I'd come across on YouTube that occurred earlier this year in Canada. And this incident reminded me of those pecking hens. Jordan Peterson, a clinical psychologist and lecturer, unwittingly found himself at the centre of a political storm, you could say. In one of his YouTube podcasts, he made a comment about a new bill that was being considered in Canada, and this bill was to protect the right of transgender people. And one of the issues that was raised in the bill is that transgender people should have the right to be addressed by the pronoun of their choice, and that this might be enforced by law. Now, Peterson was concerned about the impact of this on our most fundamental right of freedom of speech. So he posted his thoughts and reflections on his YouTube channel. Shortly after this, at the university campus that he works at, he was met by angry gender activists who were just incessantly barraging him with questions, demanding that he justify his perspective and his point of view. But the constant onslaught meant that he couldn't respond. He couldn't put his ideas forth. He couldn't say what his position was because there was no space or time for him to speak. And it just occurred to me that actually these activists didn't really want to hear his perspective. Peterson remained remarkably calm in the face of this quite gladiatorial attack. As with the hens, here was an example of how difference can generate such hostility that it becomes imperative for the assailant to win and for the opponent, or their perceived opponent, to be annihilated. A very welcome contrast, however, was found in a later discussion between Peterson and a neuroscientist and philosopher called Sam Harris. Their perspective and approach to each other was altogether completely different. Their opinions and positions differed widely on a range of different topics, but they appeared committed to understanding each other. Their philosophical discussion became rather stuck at one point on the subject of truth, and they debated and went round and round the issue and couldn't understand each other or find common ground, and eventually that particular conversation was abandoned. But later, after they'd reflected on what had gone wrong and how the wheels had fallen off, and actually their listeners had requested that they have a rematch, they met again and the conversation was altogether more productive. Their respectfulness of each other was really, truly inspiring, because they reasoned out the places where they were different and tried to get clarity with each other, and they also acknowledged the places where they could meet. And through this process, both were given the time to think and speak, and both were heard and therefore more likely to be understood. I was reminded of a paper written by a lady called Carla Wilson, who presented some research in 2013. It was actually her master's dissertation from the Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies course, and she presented her paper about the value of listening from the heart. She wrote about the experience of compassionate listening in teen talking circles, and she writes, "By providing young people with a safe space to tell the truth, talking circles encourage teens to reveal their passion, beauty and dreams, as well as their fears, problems and insecurities. In circle, young women and men bear witness to each other as full human beings and discover the wholeness in themselves and learn to relate inclusively rather than exclusively. By modelling wholeness, compassion and inclusiveness, talking circles help young people develop mature identities and form healthy relationships at home, at work and in society, providing a foundation for a more cooperative, caring world." This is from Teen Talking Circles, paragraph 4. I love this idea of compassionate listening, which means staying open to the other and listening from the heart. And the focus is on the other. It's not being concerned that we might lose our own position or forcefully trying to interrupt the other with a different point of view. Rather, it's just listening to the story of the other, to their perspective, their experience, openly and without feeling threatened. The Compassionate Listening Project teaches the skills of peacemaking, and this organisation grew out of reconciliation work which was carried out in Palestine and Israel. Rabbi David Zaslow has this to say: "Compassionate listening is a process rather than a product. It is healing precisely because it does not pretend to have the answers. Rather, it engages the participants in processes that have each side seeing the humanity of the other, even when they disagree." I guess as therapists we're trained to put aside our own opinions and values in order to truly listen to the experiences of the other. This is perhaps easier to do when we're only with the other for an hour or so. It's a lot harder when we feel so entirely different from those people that are closest to us, those in our peer groups, those at school with us every day, those at work with us, those in our families. And I wonder, how do we manage our intense feelings? How do we not get defensive when we feel that another's opinion seems so completely opposed to ours and is impinging on our rights or beliefs? How do we have conversations that heal rather than perpetuate conflict? So there it is, my wise ones, our Ask It question for today. How do we manage difference?